God's people head home. Zerubbabel, that's a funny one to say. Give it a go. Zerubbabel was one of King David's children's children. So he was one of God's people. But like many of God's people, he was far from home, in a land called Persia. Now Persia was beautiful, the most beautiful land in all the world in its time. But it wasn't where God wanted Zerubbabel. So one day, God whispered a secret to Zerubbabel. It's time for you to go back home. And when you do, I have a job for you. Rebuild my temple. Rebuild God's temple. Zerubbabel could hardly believe it. The temple was where God came to be with his people. For years, there'd been no temple at all. God wasn't there at all. But a new temple? This could only mean one thing. God was getting ready to come back. Zerubbabel marched straight in to see the king of Persia. And he said, "Almighty king, kingly king, most kingish and kinglike of kings. Can I ask a teensy-weensy, itsy-bitsy, teeny-tiny favor?" "Anything," the king said. When Zerubbabel asked to go back home and take thousands of God's people with him, what do you think the king said? The king said, "Absolutely! Yes, yes, yes!" Because God was using this king hundreds of miles away to bring his people home. Even though the king didn't know it, he was fulfilling what God had told the prophet Jeremiah. You won't be far from home forever. The temple won't be gone forever. Does it feel like you're all alone? Does it feel like my plans aren't working anymore? That's not the case. I'm still with you, and I still have a plan. Not just a today plan, but a tomorrow plan. In fact, it's a forever plan. And a good one too. It's a plan to take all the wrong and make it right. To take all the darkness and make it light. It's a plan to bring you back home to me. When Zerubbabel went to Jerusalem, he started to rebuild the temple. It was hard work, and a lot of people did not want him to finish. They tried to ruin all the work God's people were doing on the temple. But God was with Zerubbabel. Even when he was far from home, even when building the temple was hard, even when his enemies tried to stop him, God was with Zerubbabel. And so the temple foundation was finished. Zerubbabel and a priest named Jeshua gathered many of the people together, and they sang the same song Solomon had sung when they built the first temple. God is good. His love is better. We hope he'll live with us forever. The people sang and danced and played tambourines and trumpets. It was a loud day. But many people, especially the old ones, were crying. Why? Because they remembered Solomon's temple, and they knew this one just wasn't the same. They also realized something that day, that maybe, just maybe, the best way for God to live with his people might not be a temple of gold and wood and fabric at all. Maybe God needed to come to his people some other way. If God was going to live with his people, maybe he'd have to come to the earth as a living, breathing person Emmanuel, God with us. Zerubbabel couldn't quite figure out how God would do it, but he knew that God would do it. And until the end of his days, the same old song repeated in his heart. God couldn't remain. Sin drove him away. So Zerubbabel began to hope and to pray, God, will you come to earth to stay?